Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming to one of the final sessions of Dash 2023. I'm so excited to be here with you in person for this great panel, creating a culture of security. Did everybody have a great day at Dash? Yeah, it's just been a full day of interacting with all of you, which is so nice after taking a little break from it for just a couple years there. I'm Andrew Krug. I lead the security advocacy team at Datadog, which is the team that's responsible for our Security Labs blog. If any of you are familiar with Datadog Security Labs, that is the stuff that I do. But I am joined by some absolutely fantastic guests here today. I've got Nate Vogel, the VP of Data at Charter. Fun fact about Nate is that he loves camping in Colorado all year long. So rain or shine, snow or heat.
That's right. Particularly snow.
Oh, God.
Colder the better.
And then moving over in order here, I've got Nielet from the Datadog Security Design and Guidance team, whose fitness coach happens to be a golden retriever. Next in line here is Eric Chiang, software engineer from Google, also a background or a degree, I think, in theater.
I don't have a degree in anything, but
okay,
yeah.
So no degrees, but a prominent theater person.
That's good for what's about to come next.
Yeah.
Which, will make a little bit more sense here in just a minute.
Yep.
Because we're also joined by Mike Lory, who is a security and privacy leader at Samsung Smartthings. He's the one with the degree in theater, which hopefully is not security theater.
I spent college money on it.
Man, this icebreaker is like solid right here. Yeah.
So we're going to try to improv our way through this entire session. And I think the thing that makes it better is, of course, all of you, because we're happy to take questions live. My good friend and colleague Jason there has the soft, squishy microphone, which he will either run to you or throw at you based on your preference. But today, really, our goal here is to just talk about how hard it is to create cultures of security in our engineering organizations and our businesses overall, right? So all of us are continually inundated with, just like depressing news every day that, there's a breach or a misconfiguration or a 0 day in something. And, it's really easy to just get down about the state of things. But if we have these really strong security cultures where we know that we're well poised to handle these things, we're doing our diligence, it makes life a little bit easier, which is something that we're pretty fond of at Datadog, because we make tools that genuinely make life easier for most of you. So we're going to kind of go through some different categories here. And I think the first one is just representative of kind of the pool of experience that we have on stage, which is, what do we know about just the good, the bad, and the ugly of building security cultures? And so the first question, and I'm actually going to have Mike here kick it off, is what would you say is the most important part of getting engineering teams to consider security as a core value?
Oh, man. Well, to sort of riff on your joke earlier, you can't ever engage in security theater. If you bring requirements or you bring controls to a team that are resulting in work that they have to do, those controls have to not necessarily be something they fully understand, but they have to be something that they can approach. And if they provide feedback of no, actually, you've misunderstood, it doesn't work that way, you're responsible to take that seriously and not necessarily change your mind, but actively consider it and address the issue that they're raising. Because if you don't, you just continually erode trust. And the opposite of that is just, show that you're willing to be wrong and show that you're willing to be corrected, and never engage in security because security is fancy. That I think is the first step.
Humility, what a novel idea.
Yeah.
Don't be a liar.
I think that also my general experience is that most security tooling is trash, and engineers are, in my experience, extremely happy to do the secure thing, but if you make the secure thing waiting a week to talk to a security engineer about onboarding onto this thing, then even the most well-spirited person is just going to go away, right? Like, I'm going to go do the insecure thing so it's easy. So I think a big part about it is just like whatever your well-lit paths are or whatever your like default things are, those have to be really good so people would rather use that than everything else, and they have to be secure. And I see just a lot of issues where security teams like, we're special, right? We build the special tooling, so you have to go through the special process. And that kind of thing just breeds so much anxiety in, let's say, other people, not me, but maybe me as well.
I'll make it a little stronger. It breeds contempt.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
It's bad.
Yeah, if I have to add on and also take into consideration what you both said, I think tooling is not the silver bullet there. So starting with the right mindset and sort of to throw the idea of decentralizing and democratizing security, like what we have been trying to do at Datadog is at the design level, at the very start of when we start a new project or so, not just towards the end of it when like there's a pen test or a dynamic test or a code review, but really an RFC is being built right then and there. So going beyond just the tooling aspect, but the guidance and education that's pertaining to our technology stack and what we do. So how can we make sure that everyone's involved in it, everyone's contributing to it, not just security, but engineering in general. And I think that's been proving to be a big formula for success in making security of value, because now security is not being seen as a problem, but it's more of an incentive to contribute to. Yeah.
I think to put maybe a fine point across all those, or an overarching point, making it just part of the process that everybody does all the time. So part of your SDLC, it should not just be that thing that gets done at the very end because there's compliance things. It should be part of the requirements that you're building towards in the first place. Yeah. And some groups, particularly those that are not responsible for security, for enterprise security, may be resistant to that because they have other requirements, other timelines that they're trying to adhere to. So it sort of breeds that underlying, like, this is not my job, I shouldn't be doing this. So how do you make it really part of the primary responsibility set of the developer?
Yes, we heard two themes there. Like, one of them I'll just reiterate is that most security tooling is trash. You heard it here first.
How do you feel about that as a representative of Datadog?
Next question. How does the audience feel about it?
As a security person, I've seen a lot of bad tooling, and I've seen a lot of bad process and gates, that kind of go up as a means of enforcing security controls. And anytime that you put up a gate, somebody always figures out a way to drive around it.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that the common theme here is that really culturally this starts at the top of your organization. It comes from an acknowledgement and investment, a buy-in from your leadership that security is critical enough that you need to bake it in at the earliest stages. We have a $5 word for it now. It's called reduced developer friction. And that's kind of a theme that comes up at a lot of conferences. Yeah. But I am curious, what would you say to the folks out there that are looking to know, like, do they have a problem? Like, what's one top line metric that they could use to take to the executive team and say, I think that we need to invest more here, and here's actually a tangible data point from something I already have. What's something that everybody here could go observe? Anybody want to jump on that?
I can start with something here. One is, how early on did you start with your security activities for something? And then not just how much vulnerabilities or findings you have, but what about the remediation metrics for it? That tells how much the team is involved and invested in taking care of the security aspects of the service. If that's not gelling right, then that's a deeper problem that the leadership needs to address from top down.
I think one thing that everybody understands is risk. So not building a doomsday scenario per se, but there's been enough examples out there where the risk-reward ratio is pretty easy to justify, and leadership is pretty easy to say, look, we need more time to do this right, because if we don't, I mean, the consequences could be really expensive.
I'll say the one hard thing about risk is that every security team is convinced that their risk is more important than like everything else, and I've heard that from executives where they're like, every security team, everything is always a high risk, right? And I think a lot of the processes that we try to do, like we roll out security controls all the time, and it's always just about having a process of like, implement this in an audit mode, gather data about like how many people you're impacting, how expensive is this gonna be? And that can annotate the risk in sort of another way, just like you would with any product, right? Like how hard is this gonna be? How expensive is it gonna be to build?
I'll play a weird game with words here. And like security tools, by and large, I agree, are frustrating to use. But like security tooling, I think is a thing that is often overlooked as like that adds security. And one of the things that my team tries to do is, if we see an issue that every single development team has, then the development teams don't have an issue. The enterprise has an issue. And so building tooling such that that it's remediated earlier in the pipeline or before it even enters the pipeline, that's security tooling. But like most people will be like, well, that's operations. It's like, yes, but it's putting security so that it never becomes a problem. And so like having a mindset of not get there early, but once you notice it, identify whether it's isolated or it's enterprise and addressing it appropriately. I mean, to go back to the first question, that's also like an excellent way to build trust with your customers.
Yeah, all those top line metrics are awesome metrics, I think, and things that everybody in the audience can think about. Like you've all probably had a cyber insurance assessment at one point that you could draw on for the risk dimension, but as said, security people love risk assessments so much that we actually had to invent a level higher than high, which is that we use low to maximum now. So low, medium, high, maximum risk, or if you're in Datadog, you'll see low, medium, high. Critical, I think, is the highest level that we have, but it's always a 4-point scale where the fourth point is should definitely have an owner for that, et cetera. It's an interesting topic, and we could have probably an entire panel on risk. It's one of the things I like to nerd out about a lot. But let's just go ahead and change gears here a little bit to technology. We talked a lot about tooling and how good tooling can be or not be. I'm curious from all of you, there are tons of differing opinions on which tools are essential to creating secure by design systems. That's the dream, right? Is that we have this factory of reproducible parts that we can use and never get it wrong. But we're actually solution rich in this industry. I think that we have 100 tools that solve the same problem, and opinion poor. So of all the trends that are out there, what would you say is the one tool or piece of technology that a team just can't live without in 2023? Of everything that's out there, we've got IAST, DAST, SIMs, CSPMs, like the continuous scanning. What's that one essential heart of the program?
I'd say a good SRE team. Like, I think the DevSecOps meme lives really, really strong. But like when it comes to security engineers, there's like a few categories, right? There's like, you're on the red team, you're on the blue team, and then there's like all of the other people, and you're like, what do I do? And I think that the most successful ones I've seen are the ones who are kind of acting almost as like TPMs. Like you are working with an SRE team to make sure that whatever pipelines you're building are producing secure outcomes. Because it turns out the SREs also think of their developers as risk, right? Like, hey, you deployed this and it doesn't have any monitoring, or it has some crazy scaling requirements. So those, in my opinion, like the people are often the biggest tool and asset that organizations have.
All right. I think continuous scanning is really important. No matter how tight your processes are, how well behaved or responsible your developers are, you still need something kind of watching for some of the worst case scenarios that can really just sort of slip out there inadvertently. And actually, automation can actually be a double-edged sword. I mean, you introduce something in development, it doesn't get reviewed. Next thing you know, it kind of makes its way to prod and mixes with something else, and you've got a really big problem. I know from experience.
Yeah, I'm kind of tempted to say none, but again, like going back to, yeah, you need continuous scanning, but none of the tools are going to solve the problem for you if you don't understand what is it that you're trying to solve, and also have the training around it. By that, what I mean is, consider at Datadog, like we have everything, even our security products are part of our platform. So for us, the way we have been leveraging it is, there's CSPM out there, our cloud security team uses it, but is that enough? So how can our engineering service teams start to work with it, start to understand, are they tagging their resources properly? Are they looking at the misconfigurations that are being flagged? None of this is possible, and without the security team taking the right efforts to make sure the education and guidance and training is in place. So it depends on your context. What is it that you're trying to solve? The tool is going to make the difference, but it's not going to be your silver bullet.
So of all of that, it sounds like the one theme here is definitely people. So
We have a question over here, too.
we're going to get you a mic. We're going to bring up that mic.
We got to bring it up here? Okay. So as far as you mentioned automated scanning, particularly in the build pipeline, are there specific technologies, like scanning technologies, that you recommend, like different types of scans, like static code versus dynamic, and specific tools that are available out there that you are a fan of?
I'm just going to rephrase that question slightly for everybody. So there's two types of scanning, right, that could take place continuously. One is in the pipeline, so we can shift the scanning left, and then one is in production, right? So we have this concept now that doing one or the other is not alone adequate. But the question was about shift left tooling. Do any of you have a specific recommendation for hopefully what is an open source shift left tool that scans in the pipeline, or a piece of technology that you've been really successful in implementing that the audience can maybe take away?
I think without naming a tool, something that really integrates with your source control and runs in both a non-blocking and a blocking mode. And when I'm saying non-blocking is for findings that now you are comfortable where it's not high severity, but still provides the developer enough feedback that before they even hit that merge, they are able to take action on it.
Yep.
I think that's where you will find more value. Like early on, as I'm creating that pull request, there are rules, high fidelity rules in place that are looking for these misconfigurations. That's just my opinion.
I agree. I think that, so I don't really look at the tooling as a component of like where in the process it is. Like, to me, the tool you need is dependent on the relative security maturity of your particular enterprise. Like, I talked to the Datadog folks earlier this week about how much I despise SAST tools. And a more verbose version of that is that SaaS tools are really good if you have a very mature security culture and a very well experienced development culture, such that they can use the tools, know what they say, and then with intellectual integrity say like, yep, that's real, or nope, that's trash, and just move fast. But until you get there, it's just a place where you pour money.
That's right.
And so like, you get a lot of value from like a vulnerability scanning tool, no matter what your maturity level is, because it's just like, we found the string that says you're vulnerable. Okay, good, we'll go fix that. And so it's less about where, and it's more about where are you in your journey in terms of your enterprise. Or that's my opinion.
Yeah, SaaS tools, they're great at detecting known knowns.
Yeah.
But they're not great at detecting unknown knowns. So the question of like, should I SAST or should I DAST? Like in my pipeline, it depends on what is the outcome that you're trying to detect. So similarly, what would you say right now is the thing that you need the most to generate security metrics that is the most difficult to adopt? So we have all of these things that we know that we should be doing, like all these continuous scanners, vulnerability reporting. There's kind of a race right now in the vendor market for triage and like trying to figure out the line of code and is this thing actually exploitable? But what would you say is the most difficult component to just put in a security program to increase observability today?
I mean, I'm gonna. Sorry, can I go?
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Yeah. I know that I've already repped for the operations side of the house once, but I'm going to do it again. It's my opinion that most security tools just don't function unless you have a good asset inventory. And so, like, you can have a good process and you can have good documentation, but if you don't have people actually like following those things, updating them so that you can track them, know where they are, know who they belong to, like, all the rest of security just falls down on its face. And so, like, to me, that is the hardest part to get people to do consistently until you get to the point where it's just part of the process. It's just something that everyone does. Everyone knows it's their job. Everyone is okay with it and comfortable. And until you get there, it's very hard to get the maximum output out of any of your other tools.
All problems are inventory problems, right? I mean, just to go back to like the scanning thing, like, do you know all the repos where people develop code, right? Like,
well, at Google, it's pretty easy, right? Because you just got that one.
I mean, for that one, it's very easy. We'll put it that way. For the other ones, the unknowns are, and it just comes down to like, that your scanners are only as good as your inventory, and inventory just unfortunately looks different for freaking everything. Everything is an inventory problem. Like, I do firewall policy, right? Like, that's an inventory of like whatever all our, firewall systems and that kind of thing. You do stuff like OS query where you're like, do I even know all the machines that I need to install this on? And so, yeah.
I look at inventory problem also kind of like a centralized strategy that everyone adopts in a consistent way. Speaking from an enterprise where there's literally hundreds of development teams, and any one of them can introduce something that can risk the entire company, essentially. If it's not well followed, then each group is just going to kind of act their own way. So what currently exists is far from perfect, as very ad hoc responses. The security team that is taking in the signal that there's a problem somewhere in the stack, first of all, is acting like a switchboard, but not providing much context, and then kind of just handing it off to them and just hoping they're going to solve it, and that this little like blinking light basically stops blinking.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different for you, right, Nate? Because you're in charge of a lot of data, right? And a lot of times I think that we're talking about workloads when we talk about inventory, but there are some fundamentally different problems when we talk about inventorying data and associated risk and data governance. Is there anything that's like really worked for you to get people invested in putting the right annotations on pieces of data, like be it in a database, a blob store?
It's a constant strategy. It's a constantly evolving, right? I think we've had the most success by documentation, I mean, obviously, but it needs to be something that is kind of continually updated. So it's really, again, part of the process as you're making either data pipeline changes or schema changes, that is like a live act that also has a security implication that needs to be documented accordingly. So it's kind of like operations-centric. It's part of what you do to create MOPS in an incident if it's unsecurity related, if the service has an issue. I mean, again, I think you should need to also apply the lens of security to that. So it really is just like an adapting of the attitude.
I mean, that gets back to something that I tell my team fairly consistently is like, we have policies, we're responsible for them, my team writes them. I have absolutely no investment in them until if they become not useful anymore. And so if we need to change, update, modify a policy in order for it to continue supporting our business, do it. Don't ask me, just like, I trust you, make the call. And like, that's very uncomfortable, but it gives us the like flexibility to interact with our engineers and be like, oh, actually that's stifling where we want to go. Let's fix that so that they can continue the process. And that's not directly related to like asset inventory and management stuff, but like it's the approach that I try to get my team to take of like, our job is to support, it's not to restrict.
Eric, is there a Google DevSecOps set of principles that like cover something like this, or like a DevOps SRE of kind of playbook on the inventory side, or is it just part of the process?
Everything is an inventory system, right?
Yeah.
Like, I just want to stress that, like, you just cannot build a piece of security tooling that is not an inventory system. I think that broadly we have a good sense of like what our well-lit paths are, where we expect people to go, where we want to push people. And we try to focus a lot of our efforts there. And if the inventory system is missing data, which this happens all the time, right? Then you have to go figure out, like, you know, how bad is this? How much would it take to improve this, and sort of make that cost-benefit analysis. So I don't know if it's necessarily even Google specific. It's just sort of like, you want to solve a problem, you need to know how big the problem is, or did you do a good job solving the problem, which is something that maybe people don't think about as much, right? Like, you roll out a security control, is it working? And we try to really aggressively, for example, have reporting on machines and actually validate, like, oh, we sent you a signal to update, but are you now reporting a new operating system version? And that kind of continuous feedback is still like only really present in a few very critical paths because it's expensive to maintain. It's really expensive to, when like the operating system vendor changes the string a little bit and it breaks your whole pipeline, like that's really rough. But yeah, that's I think it's sort of just built into anything that we do.
Now we're going to get to what I think of as the spicy part of the session, because it wouldn't be a session in 2023 if we didn't talk about LLMs at all, right? Today is like LLM day. So, you know, we have all these emergent tools for LLMs. I won't name names or anything because we all know all the models. But the models are super powerful, right? And I think that they have some interesting security implications because they can do things like impersonate engineers. They could potentially build trust in open source repositories. Sometimes they could become more trusted than your security team because maybe they're generally friendly.
How dare you?
But I'm curious to hear from each of you quickly in a round, and maybe this will generate some audience questions. Please do bring your questions. In our last 10 minutes together here, we're happy to answer really anything about building secure cultures. Do each of you think that LLMs pose a threat to your company's security culture? Or just, if you can't speak to your particular company in general, we're not asking for a statement on the record, just general security culture. If yes, do you think that adopting LLMs as a counter response to increase your security, effectively having a LLM war, is a practical way to solve that problem and close that gap?
I think it is a risk. It's absolutely a risk. And it's been acknowledged by some of the charter leadership, myself included, that probably the biggest risk is just the fact that it's another inventory system. So a lot of things, not to go back to that too much of, but it's another place where data can just kind of leak out, either inadvertently or deliberately, and then it's broadly available and essentially impossible to retrieve or remove from the global LLM, if you will. So it's risky in that proprietary information can get out that shouldn't. It's risky in that potentially it could be used or leveraged to more quickly kind of crack or break down some of the more fragile security systems. So I think that there is some very real risk of LLMs.
There was like a small moment there where people were like, LLMs are going to write malware, and everyone was like, ah! But I think it was Trail of Bits who came out with a white paper, which was really interesting, which was just like, here's the things you could consider while building an LLM, right? Like, does it express bias? Does it, have like robust prompt generation, like protections, or you can't just ask it to spew toxic stuff. And I think that while it's a huge risk, I think that we're, as an industry, getting better at thinking about those risks, or at least writing them down, right? Like, we're beyond the, like, you know, we're gonna have some automated system that's gonna hack you into like the very pragmatical and social issues of LLMs, which is like the New York Times ran a story today where LLM spits out a thing where it calls somebody a terrorist, and like the woman's experience of that. And I think that those type of risks are gonna be like, those are harder as security engineers, right? As security engineers, we're just like, oh, we got hacked, versus that, which is like a much more like personal and social thing you have to deal with.
That another thing to note there is that, like, you can't stop the pace of innovation there. So as an organization, how do we embrace it? Like, for example, Datadog did a hackathon based on LLMs a while ago, where everyone in engineering was invited to participate and see what we could do with it. But along with that, the security team also were involved in it, and ensuring that there's the right set of guidance in terms of what's the input, what's the output, and also with the new OWASP top 10 LLM guidance that came out, that's a good vetted collection of industry level experts putting their inputs. So how can you learn something from that and then bring that back into your organization? So you want to embrace it because that's where the industry is going, but then how do you minimize the risks at the same time is something I think as a security practitioner we have to be okay with.
Yeah, I don't know if you heard that, but there's already an OWASP, and if you don't know about OWASP, it's the web app project that does the OWASP top 10 for popular hacks. It took us the first 20 years of the internet to have that for web applications, and now we have one for LLMs the year after. It was probably written by ChatGPT, but you know, it's actually a solid list. Do we have a question here?
But it's a good start, yeah.
I'm just curious, so, and this is for anyone, but to what degree do you think that of course, like, probably a lot really, the risks that you might associate with using an LLM tool, particularly a public one, could be mitigated, you know, to what degree could be mitigated, if at all, by instead using one that was maybe internal to the company or integrated into some tool that you're using, you know, privately accessible? Like,
Yeah,
maybe it mitigates, but how much? That kind of, yeah.
To restate the question, it was, you know, can you mitigate the risk by running your own internal model versus using a public?
Along those lines. Like, because for one, it's just the risk, of course, you know, you put something into a publicly available one, maybe it spits it back out elsewhere. But, you know, if you still have that data, if you did have it internally, you know, it's still the same data if it were to get out some other way, that kind of thing, like the degree it might help, or the risks that are still there.
Can I answer the initial question and then answer his question, because
Yeah.
it sort of ties in? So I think that LLMs are a risk. I don't think they meaningfully change the threat landscape in security, and the reason why is that by and large, your security engineers are a substantially larger risk because of the permissions that they have than an LLM will ever be to your company's internal threat landscape. Losing your IP, that's a slightly different conversation, but like security tools and security professionals are always disproportionately powerful users on your network. And so if you're saying that LLMs are scary, it's like, yeah, they are, and you should be aware of them. But are they scarier than your you know, the hackers who you already employ? Probably not. Yeah. And so, you know, to go back to your question, I think that you're not changing the risk, you're just moving it, right? Because if you're using a publicly available LLM, then the risk is you're engaging with an outside party. If you're using an internally sourced one, then you're still engaging with someone outside of your control, who's ever building it, maintaining it, controlling it. And like, we like to feel, because that's an employee, that that's a different risk, but it's not. It's the same risk. It's just a risk that we have better optics into. And so, like, I would say it depends on the work that you're using it for, but it's not inherently safer. It's differently risky.
I think Nate probably has some thoughts here, but I think this has become the year that we are all getting more used to reading the fine print and understanding the licenses for the tools that we're using more than ever, because the risk is so clearly articulated on the front side of that transaction for you as a user of these tools, but most people are used to just kind of blowing past the fine print. Also not understanding the legal implication of the resultant work that an LLM is doing. Who owns the final output? Do you as the prompter own the output? Does the corporation that is serving you the model own the output? Does your company own the output? Or does the AI itself have some prominence for the thing that it's creating? These are all like Star Trek, like data goes and gets a lawyer kind of stuff. But it's an interesting conversation. Curious your thoughts, Nate.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing about terms and conditions is it not a common prompt to copy those into an LLM and say, summarize this for me? Certainly pretty viable use case. Probably going to miss some summaries, but I think the internal tooling is actually a really positive, potentially, way to mitigate some of the risks. As again, I think to your point was essentially you can't slow innovation. It's a powerful tool. We should really make the most of it as development teams. Shouldn't fear it per se, but I think that there's some responsibility on. I feel some responsibility in leadership to provide that type of tooling back to the dev teams. Otherwise, I mean, they're gonna make use of it one way or another. You can't really like clamp down and say you can't use this. You can try, but it won't work.
I mean, that's the thing so that sort of relates back to a conversation that I have to have routinely, which is like, if you hear risk and your response is to be afraid, then you're thinking of risk wrong. Risk is about awareness. It's not about fear. And so like, if you see a risk and you have a fear response, then you're reacting wrong, or you're probably reacting wrong. There are some risks that are so scary you just back away.
We're just about out of time here. Nielet, Eric, any final thoughts on the LLM conversation to impart to the audience before we wrap it up?
I do not work on LLMs, so I appreciate your thought. Yeah, just run your own. It's really easy, right?
DIY it.
Yeah,
Got it.
Yeah.
Nielet?
I think if you're doing something with LLM, engage with your security teams early on and see what guidance is in place so that you're not essentially diverting from what is supposed to be the path that you're supposed to take. So, yeah.
All right, with that, let's give our panelists a big round of applause for being here with us today.